in the tomb of Semenses by Frank Belknap Long. Strange indeed are the ways of the ancient gods. To me, a humble scribe and a lowly dreamer of dreams, they have granted an understanding of those melancholy signs and portents which foretell the end. Thus I know that even as I write, the mantle of Osiris descends upon the world. For now, all of those marvelous things prophesied in the yellow scrolls of Amenses, which lie buried at Thebes near the catacombs of the pharaohs, have come to pass, and the moon is the color of blood, and the scintillating pole star retreats shrieking into the infinite blackness beyond the multi-hued suns. In the solemn gray cities of the West, in the charcoal-burning cities of the West, men walk the streets with slow and muffled steps, and with an incubus of silence upon their souls. And in the great white castles by the sea, kings and emperors sit among their graceful handmaids, and attired in spotless robes, sip costly green wine from cups of alabaster, and seek forgetfulness in revelry and sin. But some, at least, are wise, and know that the end is near, that the sun is burning less brightly, and that a frightful cold creeps rapidly equatorward from the purple poles. Even now, all of the soft, sweet, gentle noises and little sounds of this workaday world have ceased, and there remain only the ominous croaking of frogs on the edges of dank brackish tarns, and the shocking laughter of the mad in the streets of London. Because of these things, I write boldly, knowing full well that what I here inscribe with a quill and pen on a sheet of faded papyrus shall never be read by any mortal man. I cannot remember when it was that I went into the land of yellow spectres to study the mummies in the catacombs of the pharaohs. I know that it was many years after the last of the great plagues, and that many strange things had come about among the living. I remember that gods in the form of men built great engines of brass and of iron, which plowed their way over the land, and great ships of wood and of steel, and even of stone, which carried thousands of their kind over the ocean, over that terrible and endless sea, whose immensity had paralyzed the faculties of Semenses, the greatest of the unremembered pharaohs. I had a purpose in going into Egypt, and I talked vaguely of archaeology, of excavations, and of the Royal Society. But in truth, I cared not for these things, but only for the visions which the dead evoked, only for the heathenish and unhallowed visions which the finely wound mummies evoked. For days and days I had wandered over the yellow sands, within the shadows of the pyramids, dreaming the dreams of unremembered kings, and absorbing into my very being all of the solemn melancholy of a stately and glorious past. For days and days I had sat among the reliquaries of well-ordered civilizations which had flourished on the banks of the Nile when my ancestors were wretched ape-men crawling through the rifts of Java, civilizations which were no more when the first sun-baked bricks of unhappy Babylon were laid by a Semitic prince. And then one night, when the Egyptian moon seemed more menacing than usual, a demon took possession of me and bade me do a terrible deed. I was to creep stealthily into the tomb of Semenses, into the awful sepulchre of the great and mighty king who ruled over the children of Ammon in the lonesome years before the gods were created, and with a knife of gold I was to sever from the body the head of the most venerable of pharaohs. For Semenses lies stretched at full length upon a marble slab, and although he is enshrouded in 7 cerements, his head remains uncovered in the darkness. I listened to the holy scribes and eunuchs of Thebes discuss in awed whispers the glories of the sacred sepulchre, and heard them tell how 25 wives sit nightly by the side of the royal corpse, and stroke its long white hair, and whisper sweet secrets into its ear, and comfort it with their kisses. Of course I laughed at these things, seeing no reason why 25 wives should thus humor a mummy whose days of greatness were past. But when the holy scribes and eunuchs saw me blaspheming, they crossed themselves and bade me be gone, and one even threatened me with his staff of ebony. With a shocking laugh I left them, and prepared to enter the house of the dead. I first anointed myself with oil, that the spells of the succubi and vampires which haunt the deceased might not avail against me. Then I clothed myself in raiment befitting my station, and selected a staff of ivory with which to defend myself against the attacks of the bats, whose duty it is to destroy all those who would approach the pharaohs. I also placed upon the third finger of my left hand the ring which I had received from Queen Asamia in my 5th incarnation, and which I had found again in my 20th. Thus fully prepared to defy every Egyptian god, I left Thebes and journeyed toward the tomb of Semenses the Great, wearer of the double crown, and favored of Ammon and Month. The tomb of Semenses is of reddish stone, and rises obliquely from out of the sands. No one knows by whom it was built, or even why it was built. Perhaps it was once a charnel house, or perhaps the lesser gods assembled there to pray to the greater gods. It was never meant to hide the bones of a king, and the scribes and eunuchs say that the Ka of the dead pharaoh was furious when it found itself entombed in so unchaste a place. Indeed, its wrath was terrible to behold, and 8 of the 25 wives fainted, and 6 sought refuge behind the marble slab. The moon was high in the heavens when I reached the sinister vault. I carried a torch that I might gaze well upon the features of the dead king, and in my belt was the knife of gold with which I was to do my loathsome deed. I approached cautiously from out of the semi-darkness and laid my hand nervously upon the ancient bolt which fastened the great stone door. Silently I removed it, and my heart beating wildly within me, I entered the hallowed tomb. Within there was a great darkness, and my torch shed but a feeble light. But by its dim rays I could distinguish long rows of fatuous sphinxes, and the sacred marbles, and the loathsome effigy of an alien god, with a face so hideous that I cannot describe it, and the charming altars which were erected thereto, all of the kind of little local gods, to Eros and Hos and Sespit. And I also saw altars dedicated to Month and Mu, and Nochbet and Neith. And I saw tablets of bronze, on which were inscribed the names of the great gods, even Ammon, and Isis, and Hathor, and Mon, and Osiris, and Set. I could discern in the darkness the trays of gold bearing the Ka's food, which consisted of lampreys steeped in oil, and the robes of red velvet lined with ermine, which the dead monarchs double donned upon occasion. But search as I might, I could find no traces of Semenses, neither could I hear the sweet-toned voices of his 25 wives. And then, as I stood there meditating upon my failure to discover the secrets of the most ancient of kings, the bats attacked me. They came out from behind the sacred marbles and fell upon me from above. They were as large as Egyptian lions, and they fought like the ancestral cats of Hathor. They were large and brown, with opaque wings, and they fought like demons, and they sunk their black teeth into my arms and legs, and although I struck at them madly with my staff of Persian ivory, they refused to be driven off. And then I thought of all the evil spells which Arabes, my tutor, had taught me when I was a golden-haired page in my father's castle, and I used them against the bats. But the creatures of darkness were not destroyed, and they buried their fangs yet deeper into my members. And then I called upon Yahweh, the God of the Jews, to deliver me from my unmerciful enemies, and Yahweh heard my prayers. The God of the Israelites heard my prayers, and he had begun to shake the sepulchre in his mighty wrath when the bats withdrew of their own accord, and retreated snarling behind the bronze dedicated to Ammon. Now to this day I know not whether the bats feared Yahweh, or whether the strange creatures admired my courage and desired not to destroy a brave man. But I was none the less grateful for my miraculous deliverance, and falling upon my knees, I gave thanks to this jealous alien god of an exotic race. And I have since held Yahweh in the greatest respect, although I worship other gods. And then, as I knelt upon the damp floor of that antique sepulchre, a strange and wondrous thing happened. The stones and effigies about me became luminous, and glowed with a soft silvery light, and a fiery square formed upon the wall back of the row of fatuous sphinxes. In astonishment and fear, I arose to my feet, only to see the marble slab bearing the body of Semenses come slowly toward me from out of the flaming square. With a shriek, I retreated until my back was against the opposite wall. There I sought to defend myself against the advancing bier by chanting old hymns stolen from the mystic papyri of the greatest of the sun prophets, Asamia, and by intoning the syllables of the funeral ode which Semenses had composed over the body of my benefactress and queen, the Princess Asamia. But the louder I chanted, the swifter the slab advanced, and I saw with horror that if I acted not, I should be crushed into a shapeless pulp against the dark wall of the terrible vault. For a moment I hesitated, and then, muttering a prayer which I had learned from Arabes, I drew the golden knife from my belt and hurled it at the hoary head of the ancient monarch. I cannot remember what happened after that, but it seems to me that I very nearly entered into the bosom of Osiris. I have memories of multicolored lights and the clanging to of brazen portcullises, and of sweet whisperings and gentle sighs which seem to belong to this period. Certainly I was lifted up and carried a great distance, and certainly eons and eons elapsed ere I recovered consciousness. When I finally awoke, it was to find myself in the open desert under the hot tropical sun, gazing up into the face of one whom I shall not describe, because I cannot. Never in all my dreams have I ever thought that there could be such a woman. I have said that I cannot describe her, and yet I can hint at the characters which made her more to me than all of the gold and the treasuries of the charcoal-burning cities of the West, more than all of the priceless hoards and the solemn black cities of the West. Her hair was as yellow as the Egyptian sands, and it glowed like burnished gold. Her forehead was as high and majestic as the forehead of the Princess Asamia. Her eyes were as blue and liquescent as the enchanted fish pools of Eldenheim, and they sparkled with the brilliancy of the diamond. Her nose was of Grecian mold, with all the haughtiness of the Roman. Her lips were as full and rosy as the lips of the noble Hypatia. Her teeth were as white, as smooth, and as even as the sacred marbles, and her laugh was as silvery and melodious as the pagan piping of the great Pan. But from the first it was not love which drew me toward this strange nymph of the desert. Rather, it was the exaltation of the soul which I felt when gazing upon her unrivaled beauty. When I looked into her eyes, I seemed to see Rome at the height of her splendor and power. When I gazed upon her nose, I saw revealed the silent glories of Greece at her intellectual zenith. When I beheld her lips, it was as if I were beholding all the solemn splendors of the Renaissance, all of the romance of medieval Europe. And when I looked upon her forehead, I saw all of the teeming millions in the charcoal-burning cities of the West. In her I beheld the beginning and the end, the past and the present, the new and the old. She was life incarnate, and she represented all of the achievements of man. As I lay in the yellow sands, watching with ecstasy her every movement, she stroked my hair, which had grown to a fabulous length, and told me that she was the favorite wife of Semenses, and that her name was Radi, and that she had saved me from the wrath of the little local gods. The mighty gods had not been vexed by my deed, because they were jealous of Semenses and desired to see him humbled. Would that I could banish from my consciousness all else but the memories of the days that I spent at the feet of Radi. Would that I could forget all else but the visions of the magic hours that I spent at the feet of the wife of Semenses. My days among the living are few, but not for the promise of eternal life would I sacrifice one of those glorious images of other times and places. To know the secrets of eons long vanished, to behold the magic of the Chaldees and the wizardry of the Medes, to listen to words of wisdom from the lips of gentle seers long since dead, to sit cross-legged before the wonder fires of the Persians, and to chant tribal lays forgotten in the dim vistas of yesteryear, to explore the heavens with the tiny bearded astrologers of Sirah, and to trace the courses of stars which have become weary of burning, and which have left the known universe to wander aimlessly through the etherless infinity beyond the red and yellow suns, to call up the memories of 1,000 vanished scenes of royal splendor and unrivaled pomp. Ah, Radi, Radi, must I forever lose you? Must I forever forego these pleasures of a poet's soul? It was on the 7th night after my entry into the tomb of Semenses that the thing happened. I thought that I loved the beautiful Radi. Mad that I was, I fancied that it was not the dreams which her beauty evoked which had enchanted me, but rather was it the love of man for woman. I imagined that it was not exaltation of the soul, but exaltation of the heart, which I felt at the sight of this wondrous creature. And so when the moon was high in the heavens, and when the Sphinx had nodded and fallen into a deep slumber, I arose from the yellow sands and took in my arms the wife of Semenses. I arose from the yellow sands and clasped to my bosom the gentle Radi, and then I drew back trembling and shuddering and aghast, for the thing within my arms, can I ever bring myself to write it? The thing within my arms was a withered mummy, and upon its shrunken and desiccated breast there was the mark of the first dynasty, and upon its forehead the sacred seal of Semenses. Yes, the thing within my arms was an ancient corpse, preserved with spices and wound with a pale green cerecloth, and upon its antique breast there were the mysterious markings of the first dynasty, and upon its forehead the unholy signature of the most ancient of kings. O Ammon, I have suffered much, but the memory of this affliction has withered my soul, and I shall never dream again. I left Egypt and returned to the solemn black cities of the West. I am glad that the end is near, that the sun is burning less brightly, and that a frightful cold creeps rapidly equatorward from the purple poles. Anon, I am glad that the scintillating pole star retreats shrieking into the infinite blackness beyond the multi-hued suns, because I long to enter into the bosom of Osiris. I long to enter into the bosom of Osiris and to forget